Stop scrolling right now, because what Kendrick just did to the entire music industry is so quietly demonic, so cold-bloodedly precise, and so terrifyingly premeditated that every executive, every rival, and every so-called rap legend is currently sitting in a boardroom trying to figure out how a man who barely speaks in public just detonated a nuclear device under all of their careers without leaving a single fingerprint. Because when you actually pull back the curtain, when you throw out the fairy tale the media has been feeding you for a decade, you will realize Kendrick has never been what you thought he was. And the version of him that just walked out of the shadows in 2026 is the most dangerous artist hip-hop has ever produced, and the receipts are already stacked on the table for anyone brave enough to look. What I am about to walk you through is the buried blueprint, the classified file, the pattern that has been hiding in plain sight since the Bush administration, and once you see it, you will never listen to another Kendrick verse the same way again, and you will never trust another rapper's rollout for as long as you live. Because this is not a career. This is a hostile takeover of the concept of celebrity itself, and he has been running the operation from inside a building nobody knew existed. Imagine, for a moment, a kid from a corner of Compton that eats its own dreamers for breakfast, standing in front of a microphone with nothing but a notebook and a jaw wired shut with focus. Now imagine that instead of doing what every other rapper in that position has ever done, which is pick one persona and grind it into powder until the audience gets sick of him, this kid decides that identity itself is going to become his weapon. That he is going to stack costumes on top of costumes, walk through a corridor of mirrors, drop one version of himself in one room and pick up a new version in the next, and use each of those versions as body armor against a machine that has crushed every artist who came before him. That is not a rap career. That is guerrilla warfare fought inside one man's skull while the whole planet was too busy arguing about first week numbers to notice what he was actually building. And the wildest part, the part that keeps me up at night, is that almost nobody in the mainstream conversation has ever spelled it out loud, until now. Rewind the clock all the way back to the mid-2000s, because if you want to understand the boss level, you have to start with the tutorial. Before there was a Grammy stage and a Super Bowl halftime and a rap beef that broke the internet in half, there was a teenager from Compton nobody outside the block had heard of, and the name he answered to was K.Dot. K.Dot lived roughly from 2003 to 2009, in the mixtape trenches, in the burn CD economy, in the ciphers that used to circulate on flip phones and USB sticks. And if you go back and press play on those early tapes, you can hear something in the voice that should not exist in a teenager. Not fear. Not thirst. Focus. Cold, unblinking, laser-cut focus. K.Dot was not trying to save the world back then. K.Dot was not trying to be a martyr, a prophet, a savior, or a saint. K.Dot was a technician with one obsession, which was becoming the sharpest blade in every room he walked into. He wanted the syllable density of Lil Wayne at his peak, the icy composure of Jay-Z in a boardroom, and the neighborhood weight of a Compton legend who had earned every stripe on his shoulder. And the tragic beauty of that chapter is that he had zero weight on him yet. No expectation. No industry watching. No culture using him as a mirror. He was just a hungry kid stacking bars in a bedroom, and he had no idea that the mask factory was already being built around him in the dark. Then the shift came, and this is where the shape-shifting truly ignited. Around the time Section .80 landed and then Good Kid, m.A.A.d cracked the world open in 2012, he retired the K.Dot alias and walked into his birth name for the first time. He stopped hiding behind a stage handle and started signing his own name to the war. But do not get it twisted, because this was still a persona. It was just a persona with his ID printed on the label. This chapter belonged to a new character, and the character was the survivor. The survivor was the young man who had just realized that fame was not going to reach back into Compton and yank his friends out of the fire with him. The survivor was the artist who started counting who was still standing, who was locked up, who was in a coffin, and who had simply vanished into the fog of the neighborhood. And here is the part everyone glosses over. That survivor era is drenched in a feeling that most rappers refuse to even touch with a 10-foot pole, and that feeling is survivor's guilt. He was watching the kids he grew up with drown in the same water he had somehow taught himself to swim out of. He was getting radio spins and magazine covers, while the people who used to sit next to him in class were getting sentencing dates and homegoing services. And instead of doing the industry-approved thing, which is smiling for the cameras and pretending the block never existed, he made a project that felt like a diary you were not supposed to read out loud. Good Kid, m.A.A.d is not a rap album. It is a confession booth with a beat. It is a young man in his early 20s standing in front of God and asking why he was allowed to walk out of a maze that swallowed everyone he loved. But here is where a lesser artist would have stopped. A lesser artist would have found the survivor lane, painted a logo on it, and rented it out to a label for the next 15 years. Kendrick refused. Kendrick did the exact opposite of what the industry playbook demanded. He shed the mask. He walked away from the survivor character while it was still commercially peaking, and what he became next was frankly one of the most terrifying evolutions in the recorded history of the genre. Around 2015 and into 2016, To Pimp a Butterfly dropped, and the culture had to sit down for a minute because the man had transformed into a persona so heavy that most artists would have physically collapsed under the weight of it. He became the prophet. And I mean that literally. The prophet was hip-hop's sermon. He was a man with the microphone of a generation strapped to his back like a cross, and he was walking uphill with it in front of the entire planet. Now, here's the part the biopic will eventually have to reckon with. He had already banked the money. He already had the respect of every rapper alive and every rapper in the ground. He could have coasted for the rest of his career on Grammy nominations and safe collabs. Something inside him refused. Something inside him said that if the microphone had been handed to him, he was going to use it to say something that mattered, even if the saying of it destroyed him from the inside out. And that single decision, more than any lyric, any beat, any feature, is what separated him from every peer in his weight class. He traveled. He went to South Africa. He walked through communities that reframed his entire nervous system around what a black man in America is actually inheriting the moment he wakes up. He came back rebuilt from the wiring up. And when he stepped into the studio, he stepped in as a preacher, an activist, a documentarian, a rebel, a historian, and a spokesperson all at once. To Pimp a Butterfly is not an album. It is a sermon disguised as a jazz record. Every track is a wrestling match with institutional racism, with the sinkhole of fame, with the psychological demolition of being asked to represent a whole people while you are still trying to figure out who you personally are. And here is what nearly destroyed him. Being a prophet is not a costume you can hang in the closet at 5 p.m. Being a prophet means the world stops seeing you as a person and starts treating you as a symbol, and symbols do not get to have bad days, private grief, or human contradictions. Kendrick started to lose the man underneath the prophet mask. He was trying to be the perfect artist, the perfect leader, the perfect representative, the perfect voice, and the perfect black man in America all at the same time, and I do not care who you are, that math does not work. You could hear the tension bleeding into the music like a wound that refused to close. The prophet was quietly killing the person carrying him. And most fans, drunk on the brilliance of the record, did not notice that their favorite artist was silently bleeding out on the same stage they were cheering him on. That is why the next persona is one of the most logical, and yet one of the most misread, moves in the entire arc. Because after carrying that kind of weight, he had to prove to himself, not to anyone else, that he was still allowed to be dangerous. Still allowed to be competitive. Still allowed to be a rapper first and a martyr second. And that is exactly the moment Kung Fu Kenny stepped through the door and closed it behind him. 2017, the album called Damn. And out of the smoke of the Prophet era emerged a completely different creature. This version was armored. This version was aggressive. This version was borrowing energy from old kung fu cinema, wrapping himself in the imagery of a warrior, and staring at the throne of hip-hop like a man who was finally tired of pretending he did not want to sit on it. Kung Fu Kenny was a public reminder that beneath the sermons and the political weight, Kendrick Lamar was still the deadliest technician in the entire genre. He was still K.Dot from the bedroom with better production. He was still the kid who wanted to out-rap every single person in the building. But Kung Fu Kenny was more than an ego trip in a headband, because this mask had a civil war stapled to its ribs. The artist was wrestling with two forces that most performers never let the audience anywhere near. On one side, humility. On the other side, pride. Humility was telling him he came from nothing, that his family was watching, that his community was still counting on him. Pride was telling him he was the most important rapper alive, that he had earned every crown, and that the world was going to have to sit down whether they liked it or not. Kung Fu Kenny was the sound of those two forces throwing punches at each other in real time. That is why Damn feels almost schizophrenic. That is why the tracks pivot from prayer to violence inside the same breath. Because he was not writing songs anymore. He was refereeing a fistfight inside his own chest and letting the audience listen through the wall. Then, in the middle of everything, the impossible happened. He vanished. And I do not mean he took a nap between projects. I mean he executed one of the most fascinating vanishing acts in modern celebrity culture, and nobody talks about it with the reverence it deserves. For roughly 5 years, the biggest rapper on the planet stepped completely off the main stage. No albums. No press tours. No cover stories. No visible social media. No leaks. No rumors that lasted longer than a weekend. The world started to whisper. Was he done? Had the prophet burned out? Had Kung Fu Kenny put the sword down for good? And in that silence, the industry did what the industry always does, which is move on. New rappers rose. Old rappers pivoted. The algorithm kept spinning. But Kendrick was not gone. Kendrick was in the workshop. He was carving the next mask by hand. And when he finally reappeared in 2022 with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, he unveiled the most dangerous version of himself the culture had seen up to that point, and that version was the broken man. Take a second to appreciate what Kendrick actually did with this project. He walked into the biggest possible spotlight and, instead of climbing back into the prophet costume the audience was begging for, he stripped himself down to the bone in front of the entire planet. He told his fans directly that he was not their savior. He told them he had been sitting on a therapist's couch for years. He told them he had been unpacking traumas he had never even admitted to himself in private. He talked about his failures as a partner. He talked about being an imperfect father. He talked about lust, rage, jealousy, and generational wounds threaded through his bloodline. He grabbed the same spotlight he had been aiming at society for a decade, spun it 180 degrees, and shined it directly into his own face. And then he made the audience sit in the light with him. That was the bravest move Kendrick had ever made, and half the audience had absolutely no clue what to do with it. Because for years they had built a cathedral around this man. They had placed him on a pedestal so high that the human being on top of it could not breathe up there. And when he climbed down and said the pedestal had been suffocating him, some fans cheered, and some fans felt betrayed like he had personally stolen something from them. The broken man asked a question that no rapper of his stature had ever been willing to ask on record. If you cannot fix your own house, do you truly have the right to demand the world fix itself? That question detonated across every timeline on the internet. It shattered the church that had been built around him and forced every fan alive to decide whether they loved the artist or the idol they had been projecting onto him. And the receipts are already out on the counter because after the Broken Man era, Kendrick did not slide back into any of the versions the audience remembered. He did not put the prophet robes back on. He did not resurrect Kung Fu Kenny for a nostalgia lap. He did not reboot K.Dot for the anniversary reissue circuit. Instead, he built the newest mask, the one that is arguably the most cinematic of them all, the persona that insiders in his camp have started quietly calling the Ghost. The Shadow. The Oklahoma. The one that showed up on Gen X and is still walking through his current chapter as we breathe. And this one is not built like the others. This one is engineered to never be caught. The Ghost version of Kendrick is unlike anything hip-hop has ever received from him or from anyone else at his altitude. He does not do long-form interviews anymore. He does not lounge on late-night couches explaining what every bar means for the culturally illiterate. He does not chase the news cycle. He does not respond to gossip. He does not perform vulnerability the way the Broken Man did. He drops the music, evaporates into the fog, and lets the culture chew on what he left behind. He is a phantom with a discography. He appears only when the moment deserves him, and the second the moment is over, he is already back inside the wall. No victory lap. No explanation. No breadcrumb trail. And this is the exact moment the Drake War has to enter the conversation, because you cannot talk about the Ghost era without talking about the day the Ghost picked up a sword. When Kendrick stepped into that ring with Drake, he was not the prophet. He was not the Broken Man. He was not even Kung Fu Kenny with the headband strapped on. He was something colder. Something more efficient. Something more surgical than anything the audience had ever pulled out of him before. He did not try to understand his opponent. He did not try to find common ground. He did not pause to reflect on the emotional dimensions of the situation. He walked in, executed the mission with a precision that had veteran journalists on live stream stuttering, and walked back out into the shadow the second the job was finished. No press tour. No podcast circuit. No trophy hoist. Just a body on the floor and a door closing behind him. That is not a rapper. That is not even a competitor. That is an operator. A man who has done the psychological homework of shedding every version of himself that could have hesitated, second-guessed, or negotiated. The Ghost does not negotiate. The Ghost delivers. And when the smoke cleared and the entire internet was still trying to swallow what had just happened, the man was already back in the workshop, sketching the next thing. Completely uninterested in the victory lap other rappers would have milked for the next 3 years, 5 years, a full album cycle. That level of restraint is not human behavior. That level of restraint is doctrine. And here in 2026, nobody in the room is arguing anymore that this new version of Kendrick is the most fully realized he has ever been. Because when you strip the paint off it, the ghost is what happens when every previous mask has finished its job and been quietly retired. K.Dot handed him the craft. The survivor handed him the story. The prophet handed him the mission. Kung Fu Kenny handed him the sword. The broken man handed him the honesty. And standing on top of all of those chapters, Kendrick has become the only rapper in the game who has absolutely nothing left to prove to anybody, including himself. Every previous version handed him a piece of armor, and the ghost is wearing all of that armor at the same time while moving like it weighs nothing. He does not need to prove he is the best rapper because that question was settled 2 years ago. He does not need to prove he is the voice of a generation because he already carried that weight and set it down when it stopped serving him. He does not need to prove his trauma because he already spilled it in front of the world on wax. He does not need approval from critics. He does not need validation from the industry. He does not need to fight for his crown because the crown has been welded to his head with iron rivets. He is standing in a place of peace and freedom he has never had access to at any prior point in his life. And that peace, that freedom, that stillness, is arguably more dangerous to the machine than any of the earlier masks ever were. Because peace inside a system that runs on desperation is a weapon the machine has no counter for. A rapper who wants nothing is a rapper who cannot be bought. And this is the part the industry press has been criminally quiet about. Every prior era of Kendrick Lamar could theoretically be leveraged. K.Dot could be signed. The Survivor could be marketed as trauma content. The Prophet could be televised into a talking head. Kung Fu Kenny could be branded onto a sneaker line. Even the Broken Man could have been squeezed into a tour, a Netflix documentary, a wellness campaign, an award season narrative. But the ghost cannot be packaged. The ghost does not sit for interviews. The ghost does not do the promo rounds. The ghost does not put his face on the cover of the trend cycle. And that is exactly why executives, publicists, media conglomerates, and content farms are quietly, privately, deeply terrified. Because Kendrick has become uncontrollable. Not by scandal. Not by chaos. By discipline. And discipline in this industry is the one variable the machine has no algorithm for. Now pull the lens back. If you line up these masks in chronological order and squint at them, you start to see something almost supernatural in the design. Each persona arrived precisely when the previous one had completed its assignment. Each mask was carved out of a specific pressure that would have flattened a lesser artist into paste. Each version was surgically engineered to survive the exact battle in front of him, and then quietly retired the second that battle was won. This is not luck. This is not accident. This is not a marketing team in a conference room. This is a level of self-awareness that has almost no precedent in the recorded history of the genre. You have to reach all the way back into jazz to find comparable evolution. You have to look at Miles Davis reinventing his entire sonic identity every 5 years to find an artist who treated their own persona with this much intention. Sit with that for a second. Most rappers pick one identity in their 20s and defend it like a fortress until the moment they are irrelevant. They cannot evolve because their brand is a cage they built with their own hands. They cannot pivot because their fans will burn them alive for pivoting. They cannot admit growth because growth reads as weakness in a genre built on posturing and volume. Kendrick detonated that entire paradigm. He treated identity itself like a tool, like a costume, like a chapter in a book you close and never reread. And in doing that, he escaped every trap that has swallowed every other rapper at his altitude. He did not just avoid the traps. He mapped them. He named them. He used them as raw material for the next persona. Because if you line him up next to every other name he came up alongside, the contrast is almost violent in real time. Drake is still fighting to defend the same brand he built in 2011. Drake is dropping 3 albums a year, chasing the algorithm, feeding the machine, posting every scrap of his personal life on the internet like his mortgage depends on it. J. Cole retreated into his own lane and barely disturbs the mainstream conversation anymore. Kanye West detonated his own credibility over and over again because he refused to modulate his masks the way Kendrick has. Nicki Minaj is locked in endless cycles of online warfare. Travis Scott is stuck in a stadium loop, chasing the same spectacle year after year like the ceiling is not going to arrive. And alone in his own corner of the map, one man keeps shedding skins like a serpent that has decided the entire desert now belongs to him. That contrast is not accidental. That contrast is the whole thesis. And here is where the Jay-Z comparison becomes impossible to avoid, because for a long time, the ceiling for hip-hop longevity was Jay-Z, build an empire. Sign the deals. Turn every verse into equity. Turn every album into a stock ticker. Become a mogul. And Jay-Z executed that vision better than any artist in the history of the genre, and I will say that until I am blue in the face. But Jay-Z had to give up something to build that empire. He had to become a corporate figure. He had to sit at boardroom tables. He had to attach his name to conglomerates and holding companies. He had to become the industry in order to survive the industry. And that trade was absolutely worth it for him. But it was still a trade. Kendrick looked at that model, studied it for years, and made a completely different bet. He said, I want the empire without the leash. He said, I want the influence without the shackles. He said, I want to build my own house, and I am not going to let anybody rewrite the blueprint on me. And that is why, instead of chasing conglomerate partnerships, he built PG Lang with Dave Free from the ground up. Brick by brick. Room by room. Answering to nobody. He built a discography he owns emotionally and structurally. He built a stage presence, the Super Bowl performance, the sold-out arenas, the visual short films, the surgical rollouts that operate completely outside the traditional promotional cycle. Kendrick is Jay-Z's discipline and Kanye West's imagination without either of their entanglements. He is what happens when a rapper finally figures out how to be free. Not free-ish. Not free within a contract. Not free with an asterisk. Free. And that freedom is precisely why the next persona is going to shake the ground when it lands, because the pattern is now impossible to unsee. Every time Kendrick has stayed silent for a stretch, he has come back as someone nobody was expecting. K.Dot became the survivor. The survivor became the prophet. The prophet became Kung Fu Kenny. Kung Fu Kenny became the broken man. The broken man became the ghost. And here is the punchline that should be tattooed on the forehead of the industry. The ghost is not the final form. The ghost is a bridge. The ghost is the version that clears the runway for whatever is landing next. Nothing about this arc suggests the story is finished. Everything about it suggests we are somewhere in the middle chapters of one of the most historic runs the genre has ever produced. If you have been watching the smaller signals, you can already feel the next mask being carved somewhere in the dark. The recent moves. The surgical rollouts. The visual language of GNX. The choice to keep his personal life almost entirely offline while the rest of the industry lives on Instagram Live. The strategic silences between drops. All of it feels like a man preparing for a chapter that will not look like anything the audience has ever received from him before. Some insiders think he is heading into a full-blown filmmaker era, using PG Lang as the launchpad. Some insiders think he is going to pivot into ownership of entire cultural institutions, not just music. Some insiders think he is quietly building the first truly independent hip-hop ecosystem in modern history, one that could eventually rival the majors themselves and rewrite the entire distribution game. Nobody knows for sure, and that is precisely the way he wants it. Because here is the truth hip-hop has been slow to admit out loud. Kendrick is not competing with rappers anymore. He is competing with the concept of celebrity itself. He is trying to prove that you can be the biggest artist in the world without becoming the property of the world. He is trying to prove that you can accumulate influence without becoming addicted to attention. He is trying to prove that you can build a legacy without selling every private moment of your life for content. And every single persona, from K.Dot in the mixtape era all the way to the ghost standing on top of the mountain right now, has been a rehearsal for the final act. The act where Kendrick walks off the public stage entirely and continues to shape the culture from a place the audience is not allowed to see. Think about what that would actually look like on a 5-year horizon. Think about how much power that would concentrate in one man's hands. Because when the dust finally settles on all of this, Kendrick's greatest performance was never a verse. It was never an album. It was never a Super Bowl stage. It was never a diss track. His greatest performance is the disappearing act itself. The ability to be the loudest voice in the room, drop the payload, and then vanish before the audience can react. The ability to make an entire culture hold its breath waiting for the next word. The ability to weaponize silence in a genre that has forgotten silence exists as an option. And every rapper who has tried to copy that move has face planted because they mistake the disappearance for the trick. The disappearance is not the trick. The discipline is the trick. That is why the next chapter is going to be so cinematic. Because whatever Kendrick Lamar comes back as, it is going to redraw the whole map of what a rapper is allowed to be. It is going to force every artist in the industry to look at their own brand and ask themselves if they have the courage to shut it down. It is going to reset the standard for what longevity actually looks like in this genre. And it is going to remind every executive on earth that the real geniuses of any art form are the ones who refuse to be captured by any single version of themselves. Now let me hit you with the layer nobody is discussing, because if you have been paying attention to the smallest details, the ones the general audience keeps missing, you know that Kendrick has been dropping breadcrumbs the whole time. The visuals on Gene X are not just visuals. They are wardrobe changes for a persona that has not been named yet. The way he moved through the Super Bowl performance was not just a show. It was a public rehearsal for a chapter that is going to land somewhere in the next 12 to 18 months and rearrange the industry hierarchy in a way that will make the Drake beef look like a warm-up round. The PG-Ling creative team has been quietly signing partnerships with filmmakers, fashion houses, and independent labels that nobody in the pop press is tracking, and if you follow that trail, you can see a footprint being laid down that does not fit inside the boundaries of a rap career anymore. This is somebody building a shadow empire in real time while the rest of the industry is arguing about first-week sales and streaming manipulation. And this is where the truly frightening part of the story lives, because the industry has been trying for years to figure out how to leash him, and every single attempt has failed. The label leash failed. He owns his masters. The media leash failed. He does not do the press. The social media leash failed. He does not post. The scandal leash failed. He does not give the tabloids anything to feed on. The collaboration leash failed. He picks his features like a sniper picks a target. Every hook the industry has thrown at him, he has stepped around like it was moving in slow motion. That is not luck. That is somebody who studied the machine so thoroughly that he learned the exact angle at which every trap swings shut, and he learned it before he ever needed to escape one. Now think about the emotional cost of that. Because a life engineered that carefully is not a life without pain. It is a life spent in a war room. It is a life spent watching every door before you walk through it. It is a life where you cannot afford one wrong move, because you are the last domino standing between the culture and a complete corporate takeover of the last independent art form left in the mainstream. And that is the weight Kendrick Lamar is carrying right now in 2026, in a genre that has never asked one artist to carry this much alone. Because when Kendrick eventually does step back into public view, whatever version he unveils is going to walk into a landscape that is desperate for a leader who cannot be bought, cannot be bribed, cannot be blackmailed, and cannot be scared into silence. And there is only one man in the current class who has spent 20 years training for exactly that role. Meanwhile, look around at the competition. Look at what is happening in every other corner of the industry while Kendrick Lamar is in the workshop. Drake is out there posting again, chasing another rollout, dropping another feature-heavy project, and hoping the algorithm forgets what happened in 2024. J. Cole is quietly retreating even further into his private life. Kanye West is somewhere on a continent burning another bridge. The younger generation of rappers is stuck cosplaying eras they were too young to actually experience. The industry has never been more crowded and yet more empty at the same time. It is a room full of noise with almost nothing being said. And into that vacuum, Kendrick is about to walk with a full arsenal of chapters already in the vault, ready to drop the next mask on top of a landscape that will not know what hit it. The other layer that has to be spelled out, because the mainstream press keeps burying it under gossip, is that Kendrick has redefined what winning even means in hip-hop. For 30 years, winning meant units sold. Then it meant streams. Then it meant social media metrics. Then it meant beef leverage. Kendrick has quietly rewritten that scoreboard. Winning, in the Kendrick doctrine, means being the artist the machine cannot metabolize. Being the artist the algorithm has to serve on his terms. Being the artist whose silence carries more weight than another rapper's entire promo cycle. That is a completely new definition of victory, and it is one every executive in the game is going to have to reckon with in the next 5 years, because the audience is slowly starting to catch on. The audience is starting to reward discipline. The audience is starting to reward mystery. The audience is starting to reward the artist who respects them enough to disappear between statements. And every single one of those cultural shifts has his fingerprints on it, whether the culture wants to admit it or not. And this brings us back to the question everybody in the comments is going to want an answer to. What is the next mask? What is the version we have not seen yet? And this is where I have to be honest and tell you that Kendrick Lamar has trained the audience so well that even asking the question is falling into the trap. Because every time the culture tries to predict the next mask, he shows up as something we did not have a name for yet. K.Dot did not predict the Survivor. The Survivor did not predict the Prophet. The Prophet did not predict Kung Fu Kenny. Kung Fu Kenny did not predict the Broken Man. And the Broken Man definitely did not predict the Ghost. So whatever comes next, I am telling you right now, is not on your bingo card. It is not on my bingo card. It is not on anyone's bingo card. And that is exactly why we are all still watching. But if I had to bet on the shape of it, I would tell you this. The next mask is going to be the one that walks off the stage entirely. The one that turns PG Lang into an institution. The one that puts him in the director's chair, in the producer's chair, in the boardroom, and in the archives all at once. The one that stops being a rapper and starts being an architect. The one that treats the music as one department in a much larger operation. And when that mask arrives, the entire industry is going to look up from the algorithm and realize the game is not being played on the field they built anymore. The game is being played on a field Kendrick has been quietly designing since he retired the K.Dot name over 15 years ago. So here is what I want you to sit with tonight, and here is the question I want every single one of you to drop in the comments, because I read them, I actually read them, and this is the exact question that is going to shape where this conversation goes next. Which mask hit you the hardest? Was it K.Dot, the technician? Was it the Survivor from Good Kid, Mad City? Was it the Prophet from To Pimp a Butterfly? Was it Kung Fu Kenny on Damn? Was it the Broken Man on Mr. Morale? Or is it the ghost that is standing on top of the mountain right now, staring at the horizon like something the rest of us cannot see yet? Drop your answer down below, and I promise you, the community discussion on this one is going to be electric, because every single mask has an army behind it, and every single army thinks their era is the real Kendrick. And listen, if you made it all the way to this point of the video, you are the ones this content is actually made for, so thank you for staying. Do me one small favor before you leave. Hit that like button, because the algorithm is currently in a mood, and every single like on this video is one more push against the machine that would rather bury this conversation than let it breathe. Subscribe if you have not already, because we are going deep on every single one of these masks in future videos, chapter by chapter, and you do not want to miss the deep dive on the Broken Man era, which is coming next, and which is going to reframe the way you hear that whole album. And finally, before you scroll off, take a look at the video on the end screen right now, because I lined it up specifically for the mindset you are in after watching this one. And it is going to answer the question a lot of you are already typing into the comments about what Kendrick does next. Because the truth is, the story is not finished, the mask is not final, and the ghost has one more door to walk through before we see what is really on the other side. And when he walks through it, this channel will be the first one to break it down, frame by frame, mask by mask, down to the last breath. So stay ready. And do not blink, because the next chapter of Kendrick is already being carved in a room the rest of us do not have the key to yet.